Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, it is DebateSensei NFA-LD edition, where we talk about things relevant to competitive debate in the National Forensics Association. I have with me Dr. Justin Kirk from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Thank you very much, Justin. We also have Chad Meadows from Western Kentucky University, who is Director of Debate there. Thank you both. All right. I'm Jared Kabiga-Miller. I am a debate coach. I am also a professor of communications. And the episode today, we have our questions and answers. This is where Chad and Justin went out and gathered some questions from the community, and we're going to go through them. So I really love this. I really love the engagement that you were able to find. Okay. Let's start with the activity overall. I think I like this one, nice and broad. And you know, like, what are some? It also not necessarily you, but I think also if you've heard of any suggestions that maybe you don't support, but still there might be some following, I think that would also be acceptable as to include in this discussion. So, what do y'all think? Changes to the NFA.
I don't mind starting with this one, since I kind of was the author of a major proposal to change the format. So a couple of years ago, our squad proposed a substantial change to the time format for the debates. And because one of the things that we noticed, especially when I first arrived in the activity 5 or 6 years ago, was the college LD times are mapped basically after the high school LD times. With one change, which is the 1 AR is 6 minutes instead of 4 minutes. But in a value debate, there are different kind of stakes and different kind of expectations for how you argue versus a policy debate. And so a lot of the things that policy debate tries to teach tend to get lost by the wayside in the time format that currently exists. So one of the things we thought about was introducing a negative block, 2 back-to-back negative speeches, or a longer negative speech where they could develop some of their arguments, because right now the negative only gets to speak twice. And there's no kind of middle speech for you to strategize or explain what you're doing. The other big issue is a lot of students complain about the lack of prep time. Right now there's only 4 minutes of prep time. Oftentimes that's insufficient to do things like go look for a piece of evidence you might need to answer something, or write out a 3-part answer to an argument that you need to respond to. Some debaters can manage that, but a lot of them, especially newer novice and JV debaters, 4 minutes is just not enough time to go looking for stuff in your tubs. And then the last big issue I think that people have been kind of grappling with is there's an imbalance between the last 2 rebuttals that I think substantially impacts how debates play out. The negative has twice as much time in the NR that the affirmative has to respond to. And when you're in a 3-minute deficit in the 2 AR, not only do you have to make substantial choices that limit how well you can argue things, but also sometimes the debates aren't as good because the affirmative just loses on being spread out of the debate, or loses because they don't have enough time to cover the nuance or different. So there's 3 key format improvements. Would be more kind of flexibility for the negative to strategize and build into a strategy instead of just reading a bunch of stuff and then picking something and going for that, which is what happens a lot now. More prep time for the students, probably 1 or 2 minutes per debater, and then more balancing of the NR and the 2 AR to create less of a kind of time skew in those last speeches.
Yeah, and to add on to that, something that I think, so we did kind of an experiment this year where we went to basically roughly the same number of policy tournaments as we did LD tournaments. And one huge thing that we picked up on is that no cross-ex of the second affirmative speech is like a genuine game-changing, and then once you have it for a while, mind-boggling difference between the activities. Because, you know, the debate fundamentally hinges on the answer to the 1 and C. You know, you read your AF, but the negative fundamentally changes the debate, and then the vast majority of the arguments that will be relevant to a decision on most debates come out of the second affirmative speech, or at least come out of the way the second affirmative speech explains AF 1AC evidence.
Okay.
There's no cross-ex of that, which is, I think, Yeah, now that I kind of like see that
Really?
difference is something I think needs to change. Like, for instance, like no one ever gets to ask about the permutation.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Not applied in debates.
Or the
No one
link
gets
term.
to ask about the counter interpretations on topic
Right.
framework. Those are important things.
Okay. Okay. Now, would you just forego the cross X after the 1AC and just move it, or
I think
is
you'd
it,
have to add. I think
you
you'd
just
have
have
to
to add?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
And I will say, oh, go ahead, Chad.
No, go ahead.
So
I
the
would
affirmative
say
would be cross-examined twice, effectively, then, huh?
Yeah, and
but
you
the
have to figure out a way to do it for the negative as well.
Yeah.
One of the biggest issues is all the things we're talking about would extend the amount of time that one round takes.
right.
And the biggest pushback and frustration that we get from programs that either don't do debate or do both speech and debate is that at a lot of tournaments, especially at nationals, debate is fit into the schedule given its current time constraints. And
Right.
expanding that from 45 minutes to an hour or an hour and 10, hour and 15, really makes scheduling hard at some speech and debate tournaments, given that. So I think that's the biggest pushback we've gotten on this was like format problems with expanding the time. But I agree with Chad that like not cross-Xing the 1AR is just devastatingly bad for the neg sometimes.
Okay. Okay. That's really interesting. Yeah. Like it seems like aside from like maybe shortening the 1AR, yeah, everything would lengthen the time, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and so I think a lot of this stems from just like a paradigmatic change in the students who are participating in the event over time. Because historically, LD was one event in a sort of like cadre of events that a student would participate in. You know,
Right.
they were doing extemp impromptu, maybe, you know, a platform, and they were doing LD. I would say today, at least in terms of nationals participation, you know, at NFA, 75, 85, I mean, it's got to be high up there. Students do LD as their only event for the entire season. And so I think they're yearning for an event that allows them a little bit more deep engagement
Okay.
with the topics that they're spending a ton of time on. And that it's that give and take that it's still scheduled alongside of a lot of other events. And so it definitely is something that, you know, I think a lot of people would like to see changed.
Well, I think that dovetails really well into one of these other questions right here. Some of the current trends and developments. It seems like that one of the developments you just said was that more and more debaters are doing debate as their only event.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think last year at NFA we had 7 total debaters doing IE events out of a pool of like 120. So when you think about percentage-wise, that's less than 10% of the pool is participating in other events.
Okay.
And so that's one big thing is I think this post-pandemic is like students have kind of picked a lane and decided this is what I want to do. Right. And instead of having a national tournament where they're busy for 14 hours a day, I know Chad has several debaters who I watched running from extemp rounds to LD rounds in the past. It's exhausting. And I think a lot of these students are like, for my own well-being, I'm going to pick one of these 2 and just do that full time. Another big trend that like we've noticed in NFA-LD debate, especially since I've arrived, and you know, with the success of a couple of Chad's debaters, is the rise of like critical argumentation in NFA-LD debate. A lot of the critical arguments you're starting to see in NFA-LD debate now resemble the critical arguments you're seeing in the policy world. A lot of those kind of identity, performance, critical pessimism arguments are making their way a lot more into these debates. Which is causing judges to have to evaluate them. When I first arrived in the activity, our biggest fear about reading arguments like that is we don't have the judges for this stuff because people haven't heard these arguments before. And if once you start getting more and more judges who will listen to those things, they start getting more traction and have more of a like center of mass. And now I think like I would say 60% of the judge pool is at least willing to listen to critical arguments.
Okay. So the critiques is a big development. Any I don't know what else would fall under sort of the umbrella of a development. This is more about like how people practice debate than the rules of debate, right? So like, you know, we saw there we go. So I mean, we see the you know, specializing in this event and also the type of arguments that are coming out. Are these would you say that these are sort of the main developments that are happening in NFA-LD, or is there anything else?
I'd say like more normalization of disclosure practices.
Okay.
Emerging. Like, I mean, I think it's not bizarre anymore that like you would just like know what the A for neg is like in advance, and I think that has definitely gotten a little better. I think like one like quirk of LD that like is very unique to it is like the speech drop thing, which is like it's like a website. I don't even know who made this website actually, but it's just like a website for sharing of documents in round.
Okay.
And I would be willing to bet like NFA-LD is like 85% of the traffic on this like random site. Like you go to other communities and you like either reference speech drop or like people are like, no, not doing that. Don't like it at all. But like in LD, it's just like the standard practice. Like everyone uses speech drop. So I think that's like an interesting trend.
Speech drop. Okay. Yeah.
No idea where it came from either. I have no clue when it started, when we started using it. But like you'll get a person comes from NETC and they're like, we want to do an email chain. And I'm like, I don't know what an email chain is anymore.
So I've like pushed back a little bit from people being like, why not? Because I'm just like, the experience is better. Like it's just faster. It's like a better experience. And like the pushback is that people will lose the documents. And I'm just like, they're in your downloads folder. Like,
and at the end of the round, you can download every file from that page as a zip file, and then just label it like round 3 Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
For keeping track of like other people's speech documents, speech drop is way better than email chains. Just like hands down.
People disagree. People are like, no, it's got to be email chains, and I'm just the only thing that I really like about email change is that in college policy they have a Google group called Debate Docs, and some teams participate in it, and that like enables you to get documents from debates that you're not in, and if you're on a team that has like 50 coaches that can go like from room to room trying to get on the email chain, that's like kind of helpful for but then again, it's also really easy to just like get speech drop codes. So I don't know. I for every counter, I kind of see a better way to do it with speech drop, but good luck convincing anyone else. And NFA-LD, I feel like, is the only event I could think of that's like all in on speech drop.
Okay. Well, we mentioned earlier that critiques, have really taken a foothold, and so there was another question that I thought was relevant to that, but I need a little bit of interpretation, a little bit of decoding for this one. And they say like critiques have penetrated NFA-LD, whereas large horizontal negative strategies, including a variety of off-case positions, haven't. What does that mean? Large horizontal negative strategies.
Yeah,
I think. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Okay, so I think they're basically asking, so why don't we see like 9-10 off NCs with like a large number of off-case arguments? I can speak to this because like I feel like if I were like self-assessing, our team is usually like pushing the boundary of what is acceptable as a horizontal strategy in LD. And I think it really just comes down to the structure of the event makes horizontal NCs at times unstrategic because you don't get to develop the arguments enough. Like I just feel like leaving arguments undeveloped in the 1 NC is just not always strategic because they at times will not get developed enough to the extent that judges will even vote on them, even like flow judges. And so I mean I would bet that if you looked at our NCs from like this year versus like even 2 years ago, they're less horizontal because we're trying to develop the arguments more, because I think there is that with only 2 neg speeches, I mean I think it encourages you to like go deeper in the NC.
Okay.
And I think that this topic in particular encourages less horizontal strategies too, because the nuance that occurs between like the solvency of the affirmative and the deterrence disad means that you've got to do a lot of work there. And if you've got 6 off and 3 of those are counterplans, like you have to do so much work handling why those counterplans are legitimate or the theoretical objections to them or competition questions. It just doesn't give you time to like go for the deterrence disad. And so that's like one fundamental thing I think that Chad is speaking to. Another one is, I think particularly in NFA-LD, one of the ways to be horizontal is by reading conditional advocacies. And given that the negative only gets 2 speeches and the affirmative gets 1 shot to respond to those, there is a big hesitancy to endorse conditionality as a multiple alternatives format. Conditionality is you get 1 conditional counterplan plus the status quo, or you get a conditional critique alternative plus the status quo is fine, but you get 3 counterplans has never really flied in LD, not because we don't think it's like a good test of the app. It's just strategically impossible for the affirmative to answer that world, right? And so I think that part of it too is the format doesn't allow for horizontal strategies because it seems so unfair to the 1AR in those debates of like, they can't possibly cover 4 different positions. Whereas in an NDT CETA round, you have a 9-minute 2AC to deal with that. Then the negative block gets to clarify. Then you get the 6-minute 1AR, right? So there's a whole other like 27 minutes of arguing that goes on before the 1AR to clarify those questions in policy debate. And you don't have that like 30 minutes of debating that goes down in NFA-LD.
It sounds like the 1NC already has to take on a bit of a rebuttal character. Like you already have to be like 1 foot in the rebuttals by the end of your 1NC. Like you have to be treating it like this is what I'm going for.
Like you have to include things in your 1NC that you would not include if it was policy debate.
Right.
A great example is like on topicality. Look at a T argument in NDT. It's like a 12-second argument with like a card and maybe a standard or 2, and then it's like move on. But then like the block will develop that into like, if it's taken in like say like the 2NC, you know, like a 6-7 minute speech plus the 2. So I mean, I think like you have to include more stuff in your NC because people the like late breaking debate is not as strategic and also just kind of breaks the game.
All right, let's take a hard left turn here. Let's do something different. The topic selection process.
I'll let Justin handle this one for
sure. We are both intimately familiar with the topic selection process. Chad ran it for the 3 years before I got here, and then I've been running it for the last 3 years. There's a lot of problems with the topic selection process. Some of them have been resolved. Some of them, like the way we vote on them, we've changed to a ranked choice voting system, stuff like that. We've changed the scheduling. So it used to be that the topics would, everybody would submit papers like 1st of February, which by the way is 2 days after our first major national spring tournament. And so everybody was writing the topic papers in like the 2 days after the Gorlock Gala. And so they were never very good. It was always really hard to pull papers out of people. So we shifted the time to after nationals, which is very similar to NDT CETA. So now we're doing topic selection in May, June, and July. But I still think there are some problems. And I think that those problems kind of came up this year during the process because the way the bylaws are written for NFA-LD, the LD committee, if there are more than 6 papers, which there were this year, narrows the selection down to 6. And that is not an open process. And I think a lot of people were frustrated that there wasn't we tried to be as, open as we could. Here's the thinking we went through. I think every one of the committee members posted extensively on Facebook their thinking through this process, so that there was a little bit of transparency, but that's not built in. That if you get a committee that's like, we don't want to talk about it, they don't have to. So I think that's like one problem is it's not a very transparent first stage of the process when they're narrowing the number of papers down. The second big issue that came up is instead of making that a committee responsibility, maybe the community should just take all the papers that come in and rank choice those, and the best paper should come out of those. I think that there's some issues with that, like there should be a filtering process beforehand. But the primary, I think, process problem that's happened is kind of a question of transparency and how the committee makes its decisions. The other one is I think people are just dissatisfied generally with the like quality of topics in the past. But we've resolved that, I think, in many ways by moving the timeline. Last year, we had, I think, 4 or 5 topic papers in February. This year, by moving the date to May, we had 12. We tripled the number of topic papers that came in. And there was only one that needed revisions before the committee would look at it. In the past, like half the papers would come in and you'd be like, this is a page. Like, I need evidence. I need disadvantages, right? And not to like, bad talk anybody's like topic writing, but you had 2 days after the Gorlock to get it turned into the committee. So like you're pressed for time anyway. these were all great topic papers. And I would have been like, oh yeah, any of these 12 would be a good topic. It just so happens we have to pick 6. And so I think the biggest problem, which was topic papers weren't very good, has kind of been resolved by shifting the timeline.
Okay.
I don't know, Chad, is there anything that you experienced that I didn't bring up?
No, because I think most of the problems that I've experienced have either been legislated by me or you, and I feel like it's in a decent place, and I think it's, I think we'll see what new issues arise.
Yeah.
Well, and that's like when we shifted the timeline and changed this ranked choice voting process, the things that came up this year, like we couldn't have predicted that these would be complaints from the community, but we see why they are, and we should definitely resolve them. So like, I think as the process goes, there are always going to be some like adjustments.
No community is satisfied with their topic writing process.
Right. I mean, especially if you have one topic all season long, like the stakes are pretty high. And so I think people are really, get really invested in it. And especially when, there's a lot more suggestions that are offered. People are like, well, I wanted mine to do better than it did. And so, yeah.
Well, and I think especially because the committee process in that first stage is closed, a lot of students are like, but I put time into this paper and I didn't get a reason why the committee didn't choose mine, right? And so we almost felt obligated to those students to be like, here's why we thought you were 7th or 8th place out of 12.
Ooh, maybe like a 2-stage process where it'd be like, abstract submissions, and then those, you get an abstract approved in a very transparent system, and then so they don't have to put in all the time that it would need for that. I don't know. Thinking off the top of my head. I mean, it's kind of like how, at a conference, how you would submit for a panel versus a paper. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's always a work in progress.
Yep. I liked this topic. There's a couple of people that asked a similar question, but I'm going to go one that gives enough room to really interpret it. Advice that you have for debaters aiming for success on the national stage. So this is like a few people were questioning. It's like, all right, if you want to be the top of the top, what do you do?
Okay, so I think for me, the first thing is just to intentionally plan how you're going to accomplish that goal from a perspective of inputs. So if you say want to win a national championship, you should do a self-inventory with regard to why can't I just win one? Why can't if I just went to nationals now, why can't I win one? And if you're honest with yourself, maybe there are some skill deficits. Maybe like at the national tournament, you got out-carded a few times. Maybe you, hit a new F and you weren't particularly good at that, et cetera, right? So I think that you need to sort of figure out what are the things keeping you from success at the national stage. And then you need to define for yourself, what are the things that I can do to address those problems, deficits, drawbacks that I currently have at creating success on the national stage. Honestly, I feel like for most people, what holds them back in NFA-LD is just that they're not good enough at a large variety of arguments. And so when they hit new arguments at NFA, they, I won't say fold, but they just don't do as well in those debates. And so a good practice, I think, is you should be having practice debates that are inconvenient pre-nationals or even all season. Yeah. A lot of times when people do practice debates, they want to know what the app is, they want to know what the neg is, they want to be prepared, they want to treat it like school, and it makes sense. But maybe have some practice debates where you have no idea what's going on or have no prep and can adapt better just difficult circumstances. Maybe my suggestion is just do an inventory, figure out what you need to improve on, and figure out what you can do to improve on those things, and prepare for inconvenient circumstances.
I think another key thing for students who want to win, and I mean, Chad and I are probably pretty good people to talk about this. We both had students at that level. Is why do you want to win a national championship? Why do you want to win debates at nationals? Because here's the thing: if it's about the winning, you're never going to win a national championship. It can't be about the winning. And this is something that took me a long time to figure out as a debate coach. Is you have to motivate them to find other things for them to do in debate than just win debates. Because what happens is if you make winning the thing, when you lose, you don't respond to losing the way you should, which is to go find the inputs, like Chad said, that will resolve the thing that caused you to lose. Instead, you're like, but I should have won that debate. It's the judge's fault. It's my opponent's fault. It's so-and-so's, it's my coach's fault. And I think that like when winning becomes everything, you find excuses for why you lost. As opposed to if winning is the result of you loving the set of arguments you get to research. And this is something that really happened with me and my senior last year, Nick Wallenberg, and I'm sure happened with Chad and Andre and the stuff they were researching. If you love the arguments, you're going to win debates making those arguments because you're just going to be prepared and you're going to have more passion doing it. And so I think one of the things like that can really help students shift your perspective. So much of high school debate is about win at all costs, win the debate through tricks or through weird stuff or fringe arguments. And a lot of times winning nationals is not about fringe arguments. It's about being the best at the thing that the topic is about and just pushing through on that. So shift your perspective a little bit. If you're not finding success at the national stage, maybe it's how you're thinking about debate and what you want to get out of it that's preventing you from advancing in some of these rounds. The other main thing is, and I get this a lot with my students because we have a fairly kind of competitive LD PF circuit here in Nebraska. A lot of these students aren't used to adapting to judges. They're not used. They're like, every judge I get is like a college debater who like can flow and like evaluate arguments. Whereas like somebody from who debated in Kansas, like I love kids who debated in Kansas because they get parents and debate coaches and they have to like figure out how to negotiate between like one round I've got a bus driver and the next round I've got a 10-year, high school debate coach who knows every argument in the book. And NFA requires you to do that because there is so many middle of the road judges who have a little bit of experience or maybe a different format of experience. So that's the next big thing is like learn to adapt.
Yeah. So there was another question I thought I just posted up there. Along that sort of train of thought, though, I noticed that when I was debating, some of my competitors that I thought were just so like difficult to face competitively was they seemed to have some stuff that they cared about, that they talked about, you know what I mean? It's like, and so it's not always possible when you have a single topic. So like in NPDA, it was easy because like you'd be able to kind of adapt the round to round topics to stuff that interested you. But I found that the more that I look at any topic and I'm like, what do I care about? What speaks to me? What issues are important to me? It seems a lot easier to be motivated to like, develop that more. But then there's like this sort of intangible part of it where, people just are enthralled or they want to listen to you because you want to speak to them. And like that seemed to help me adapt to other judges, right? It's like, I want to be able to get this topic to as many people as possible. So how do I do it for this person? How do I do it for that judge? How do I make this issue that I care about something that other people care about? I don't know. That was an experience that you come across, or if you notice that in any of competitors that find high levels of success, the investment in what they're saying.
I think part of it goes back to what Chad was saying about having tools in your toolbox. Knowing all the different ways this topic can be talked about really helps you to like know what you do care about on the topic. Or if you don't care about anything on the topic, then it at least gives you some idea of like where you can find success. Because I think debaters who limit themselves to one style of debate or one set of arguments in debate immediately are hurting their ability to adapt, but also their ability to like maybe they're just like not giving a speech that like connects with something they care about. And if they change like what kinds of arguments they debated, could help.
Yeah. Okay. My suggestion is if you're having a problem with adapting, it is very likely, and this is something that I notice most high school debaters, is that you have adapted too many shortcuts, and you need to adopt a style that is universally excellent, if that makes sense. You can look at some debaters, and even if they're going slower, they are excellent, and that shines through in whoever they're debating in front of. And debaters who I think have sort of like taken some of the technical shortcuts that aren't based on having an incredible understanding of their argument, really understanding argument interaction, thinking about things like how to be dynamic in debates that matter, not just in debates in front of inexperienced judges, that matter in debates in front of experienced judges too, I think those debaters really struggle with adapting, because once they're kind of taken out of the technique game of debate, then what's behind it isn't quite as substantial as you maybe thought. And so my suggestion is that if you're having trouble adapting, it's probably because you can't explain your arguments that well, to be honest with you. And you need to go back to the drawing board and think a little bit more deeply about how to adopt a style that's universally excellent.
I will add one more point, and I think, like, going back, I actually watched the final round from last year's NFA, and there's a moment in that debate in the 1AR when Sam Cade from Mo State goes, kick this advantage, this argument is conceded. And you see Nick Wallenberg, my debater, look up and scan the judges, all 7 of them. And I think that's something that debaters don't do often enough, is look at their judges. Are they buying the thing you're going for?
Yeah.
And when I talked to Nick about this later, he's like, 5 of the 7 judges were like, no, there's arguments there. And he knew in that moment he was going to win the debate because he had picked up on something that the judges had also picked up on. And I think that's a big part of adaptation. Ask questions before and after the debate. Keep lists of judges and preferences. We have a spreadsheet with every judge in the country that's ever judged us, and rating systems on types of arguments they like. Weird quirks. Here's what this judge wants, this and not this, right? Things that might upset your ability to adapt to them. In particular, there's one judge that did not like my debater cursing ever, right? And I think Nick maybe only ever had one debate where he did not curse in front of that person, and that's almost like an immediate, like, that judge is not going to vote for you because you've now, like, violated some rule of decorum that may not be universal in the community, but is particular to that judge. And that knowing that that judge wants that and that you should try to adapt to that is really important. So asking questions, watch your judges, something we lost during pay attention to what's going on in the room, all the stuff we teach in rhetoric, right? That is not the speech.
All right. So, hey, thank you all so much for like the insight into this particular format of debate and the things that are in development right now and have been established. We got one more episode coming up. I look forward to talking about it. A big old overview of the fall semester, basically. So, thank you, Justin, Chad, for being with me on this episode.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Jared.
Thank you.